Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Dawn Henwood and I am delighted to be here. Delighted to see some familiar names in the participant list today and lots of names of people I haven't yet had a chance to meet. I hope that you will all keep your eye on the chat box as we go along because this is really meant to be an interactive session. You all come here today with various kinds of experience with proposal writing, and so I'll be asking you to tap into some of that experience and raise questions and respond to some questions I have for you. So I will be monitoring the questions and answers box as we go, and I will take questions as we go, but if we get kind of a bunch built up there, I may also say, we'll come to those in a few minutes. All right. So I proposed this session to Engineers Nova Scotia because, as you know, I'm now a communications coach and I've been working with engineers and other, I would say, STEM professionals for over 20 years now. But I have had my own journey in proposal writing. It's something I used to feel very, very anxious about. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. One of the reasons I wanted to do this workshop with you is to kind of demystify some of proposal writing, because I think that we tend to build up proposal writing in our minds as this huge thing because it's such a high stakes situation. And maybe there's so much, I don't think anxiety is too big a word when I think of some clients I've worked with. Maybe there's so much kind of hype around this idea of proposal writing because the word proposal also gets used not just in the business context, but in another context, right? And so, just as, a romantic proposal can be built into something that's very emotional, very high stakes, very glamorous. You've got to go all the way to Paris and dress up and everything. We kind of tend to think that there's this same kind of almost glamour around proposal writing. And so what we're going to do today is to kind of take the whole proposal writing experience, I would say, down a notch in a way. Going to try to offer some tips to you that will help maybe make it a little bit less glamorous, a little bit less intimidating, and give you some really straightforward, practical tips that you can start using right away. So we're going to address these 4 points here. And along the way, as I've said, I'm really happy to take questions about anything that comes up, any questions or comments you come up as we go. So we're going to talk about how you can change your approach from telling to selling. This is a big mindset piece. And whenever I do training or coaching with clients, it always seems that better communication starts with some kind of a subtle shift in mindset. And if you can come out of here today just having made this one subtle shift, you will find already that starts to impact your ability to write persuasive proposals. The second thing we'll explore is how you select content that will resonate with your audience. If there's one thing that I find people from technical fields struggle with, it's this area. So again, this should be a takeaway that you can start applying right away. We'll look at how you structure a proposal in such a way that you don't just inform people, but you take them on a journey, a persuasive journey. And finally, I'll share with you some specific things that you can do to avoid some of the common proposal pitfalls that I see. I should say that today's session is really focused on the kinds of proposals that you write when you already have had some contact with the client. So perhaps you've already had some conversations, maybe you've done some previous work for them, so you know who they are, what they're looking for. There's context for what you are writing. So that's the kind of proposal writing that we're going to focus on today. Now, I'd be curious to know, and maybe you could raise a hand, how many of you are writing proposals that go out in response to an RFP? So you can use your little hand icon. So thanks, James. See already some hands going up there. Adriana, great. So much of what we are going to explore today will also apply to writing a response for an RFP, but sometimes I guess the strategies or the techniques need to be adapted a little bit when you don't already have that ongoing conversation. And so as we're going along, again, if I'm making a comment about proposal writing and you're wondering, gee, how would that apply if I'm responding to an RFP, please raise that in the chat. Ray, I thank you for your comment about the sound. We did have an issue with this on our test yesterday. Any suggestions, Beth, as to what I can try? Beth from Engineers Nova Scotia is in the background here. Okay, so it looks like it's happening for some people, but not others. So we'll just I would say keep an eye on it, but I'll keep an eye on the chat and an ear. You keep your ear on the audio. There is an audio wizard that's available. If you go up to the top left of your screen under meeting, if you click on meeting, then you'll see there's an audio wizard. So if you're having trouble with audio on your end, you might try just quickly running that wizard. Okay, great. Okay. All right. So what does it mean to change your approach from telling to selling? Well, here's the first thing that seems maybe blindingly obvious, but surprisingly isn't to a lot of the people I work with. A proposal looks a lot like a report, looks a lot like a recommendation report. But the key thing to remember is that a proposal is not a report. So what a report does is it looks backwards. It says, this is what we did. And it's like a journalist reporting or describing on the past, and then it makes some suggestions about what might happen in the future, if it's a recommendation report. But a proposal is forward-looking from the beginning. So it's a completely different orientation. It's a kind of visioning document. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the key thing to remember here is that with a proposal, you're not just giving advice. You're not even just trying to influence somebody, because if all you do is maybe shift someone's perspective or change their mind on a topic, your proposal will not succeed. Ultimately, with a proposal, I'm going to be blunt, you are trying to persuade the reader to buy from you. Now, that may be to buy a project, to buy a service, maybe it is to buy an idea, because when we talk about proposal writing, the same skills you use with a client, you can also use with your boss to sell an idea or a new approach, right? So again, I'm just wondering, I'd like to kind of get a sense of where people are at. Once upon a time, if somebody had said that to me, that a proposal is about getting somebody to buy, I would have said, ooh, icky, no way, I am not a salesperson. Just wondering how many people here today kind of have that gut level reaction to proposal writing. So you became an engineer, I'm assuming, not because you were passionate about sales. So just wondering if that kind of squeamishness comes up for anybody. Oh, Corey says a little bit of squeamishness there. Yeah. Christopher says no. Okay, great. Christopher, I could be tapping into some of your experience as we go for some advice on how to think of yourself as a salesperson. So what you need to do to get into that mindset then is to really think about sales simply as problem solving. So here's my little story about how I became better at proposal writing. So about 15 years ago, I started a business. It was a writing training business, and it did well for the first while, and then it just kind of sputtered out. It kind of floundered, and there was one reason for that. It was not the quality of the service. The clients were happy. It was because I could not bring myself to sell. So then I went to work for somebody else and suddenly found myself right away getting pulled into what were essentially sales conversations and being asked to pitch services. And in, I think the first project I helped pitch brought in six figures. So, gee, here I was as somebody who was not a salesperson, and suddenly I guess I was selling. So, what I discovered was really as an academic, I had thought of myself as the opposite of a salesperson, but I very naturally fell into consulting, into problem solving. And lo and behold, they are actually the same thing. And this is what I really need you to keep in mind as you're thinking about proposal writing, because I sometimes, very often actually, see clients kind of separate these two. They think, oh, I'm selling here, so this is something different from what I normally do. Well, sales is essentially problem solving. Engineers are problem solvers par excellence. So therefore, you have the potential to be a great salesperson, which means you have the potential to write very persuasive proposals. Now, here's the thing. How can you tell a novice salesperson from a professional? What really differentiates a novice salesperson from a professional? Oh, I see that Ming has some suggestions here. Oh, Ming's just commenting. Oh, so Corey says something about confidence. Yeah, that's definitely, actually, we'll talk about that a little bit later when we come to talking about the voice in a proposal, because it's so important that you come across as somebody who's likable and collaborative, but also confident. I see Christopher has some comments here. Identifying and addressing the client's needs. Yeah, that's a huge, huge part of it. So the novice salesperson spends a lot of their time talking, which is why I was terrified of sales. I didn't want to go into a conversation and talk. But what a seasoned professional does is listen, because the essence of selling is listening. Now, here's the thing. So you might say, yeah, I get that. I get that when I'm in a live conversation with a client. What does this have to do with proposal writing? We're here to talk about writing, not conversation. In most sales processes, any sales process, your proposal is part of an ongoing conversation with the client. If you're responding to an RFP, you're initiating perhaps that conversation with the client. But it's still about a conversation, because ultimately in business, conversations are what make business happen. So you need to show in your proposal that you are engaged in conversation. And that means you have to show that you're listening, to show that you have heard your client, that you have, as Christopher says, really paid attention to what their needs are. Now, this means two things. You need to really show that you have tuned in to what your client cares about. And at the same time, this means you have to know that you are clear on what they do not care about. So in a few minutes, we're actually going to talk about a pitfall I see, which is something called the tell-all syndrome. Okay, so think about, if you've heard your client, what are they interested in? What are they not interested in? So here is an example of two different excerpts from an introduction to a proposal. So I want to know which proposal does a better job of listening, and I want to hear from you exactly what it is you notice in the stronger example. So what are some of the ways that the writer or writers are showing that they are listening to the client? So I see, some comments coming through. Thanks, folks. That we see an example B, some tailored language, and so really looking now to see what are some examples here. So thanks, Lauren. So Lauren says there is more detail. So for instance, instead of just talking about reducing the carbon footprint on transcontinental flights. So when you add details, when you add specificity, it shows that you are paying attention. Introduction A could have been written for any airline. B is written for an airline that is thinking about environmental impact in terms of a very particular area of its business. There's also, thanks Leslie, a note about the timeline. So not just saying, oh, you could save more than 3 million, typically this is what clients see. This shows that there's been a little bit of actual analysis done here and saying over the next 10 years, you could save this much money. Oh, but Warren has got a great comment here, and I would love, Warren, to hear more about your thinking, or someone else wants to expand on Warren's thought here. Warren says, A looks like a commercial ad. I wonder why that is. What do you think is what it is about A that makes that sound like a commercial? Because that's not what we want to do with a proposal, right? Proposal is about establishing that conversation, furthering that conversation, building a relationship. So it seems lofty and generic. Oh yes, generic is a word to avoid. Here I've got a little piece of good news for you and a little piece of bad news. Okay, let me give you the bad news first because it's really not that bad. The bad news is that the secret to successful proposal writing is to customize each and every proposal. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to use boilerplate perhaps as a basis, right? So we might start with A and then flesh that out in B to personalize it. It also doesn't mean that you're not going to perhaps use certain bits of kind of contractual type language, a little bit of legalese, but that's the bad news. So you need to be thinking about proposals in terms of something you customize. Here's the good news. By using boilerplate, clients often think that they are saving time. They're going to repurpose something, but it seldom does save time. Because when you take the time to really get to know your client, show that you're listening, your success rate is going to be much higher. And you'll also probably find that you get to a yes without as much kind of to and fro correspondence. As Marcel said, yeah, it's like writing a cover letter. In fact, Marcel, it's interesting you say that because I just did a session not long ago on cover letter writing, and that's actually what I tell people. With a cover letter, you're making a proposal to the team to say, here's why I would be a good fit, and so on. So it is, you are, again, saying, why would you be a good fit to work with this organization? One other little thing I'd just point out about example B before we move on is you'll notice the very last line. Talks about giving Can-Am a competitive edge with consumers wary of flight shame. That looks to me like that notion of flight shame could have been a key word that came up with the conversation, in a conversation with the client. And as much as possible in a proposal, you want to echo the language your client uses, not just the jargon they use or the shop talk germane to their industry. But if you've had a pre-proposal conversation and a particular theme has come up, and that's kind of become a buzzword or a touchstone for you as you communicate with that client, remind them of that as you create your proposals. So if you have really listened closely to your audience and you're really tuned in, listening to their concerns, their language, showing that you have done your homework, your due diligence, right? You want to do audience due diligence the same way you would be doing technical due diligence. Then The next principle to keep in mind is to be very selective about the content that will resonate with your audience, right? My family celebrates Christmas. That's part of our tradition. And one of my favorite parts of Christmas is stuffing the stockings, because, you have all these little gifts, and I like to try to choose gifts that will really show my daughter that I'm thinking of her, right? That I get her as a person, I appreciate her as a person. And so I don't just go to the dollar store or Shoppers or whatever and just kind of go down and like randomly put stuff in the stock. That wouldn't be a gift, right? That wouldn't show I'm paying attention. So it's about selecting just a few little things that I think will really show her that I care for her, that I'm paying attention. It's a bit like that with proposals. You can think of it as a stuff-all container, or you can think about really picking the content that will show the client you're listening. So here's a little exercise I'd like us to try. We have here an Amazon Alexa, or imagine this could be your Google thing or whatever gizmo you have. I don't know how many of you actually have one of these at home? Again, I'm curious. You put your little hand icon up. All right, James is very familiar with this. Okay, great. Adrienne has got one. Okay. So I have here a list of some of the many things that this little gadget can do, and you may have others if you have one at home. I would like to know which of these you would consider to be universal benefits to a user. So if you're thinking, which of these, if I'm trying to convince somebody to buy one of these, which of these would apply to everybody in the audience? And you can just put the numbers in the chat, put any comments you would like in a chat. So we're looking for universal benefits. Okay, so lots of responses coming in. Thank you. Yvonne says giving you the latest hockey scores could be a universal benefit. Ordering goods from Amazon. James says turning lights on and off. Lillian says playing music, serving as home security. Warren's got quite a list there. Aha! Interesting. And it's interesting that number 2 seems to be showing up quite frequently. Number 7. Interesting. Okay. So here's my challenge to you though. If I'm thinking about this Alexa, how are my own biases or my own interests shaping what I think of as universal benefits? So I noticed that nobody has chosen tell the weather in Australia, possibly because to my knowledge, nobody today is logging in from Australia. Maybe we wish we were because it's summer there now. So that one's kind of easy to write off and say, well, why would I want to know the weather in Australia? The reason this device actually comes to mind this week is that I had a conversation on the weekend with some friends who were saying they knew somebody who just got one of these in their home, and it was an amazing device for them. In fact, it was a life-changing device for them. And here's why. This person was blind. So if we think of number 2 as a universal benefit, well, it may not be if the buyer is visually impaired to the point that light doesn't matter to them. Oh, and Marcel says there's kind of a circular thing here. Yeah, it's a security risk in itself. Oh, that's very interesting. Hockey scores. Well, that could be interesting, but you know what? I don't even know who's playing hockey. I think there's some kind of thing about COVID that they're going to let some people play, but I don't care about hockey. So if you're selling this to me, that would not be any interest. Ordering goods from Amazon. What if somebody gave this to me as a gift, but I'm not really somebody who regularly orders stuff online? May not be. In other words, I would suggest that we could go through this entire list and not find a benefit that is truly universal. We could sort these and we could say it is likely that, a certain percentage of our audience would be more likely to use these benefits than others, but none of them, I would say, are completely universal. So if life gets this complicated when we think about just selling an Alexa, how much more complicated does it get when you are proposing the kinds of products and services that you work on as an engineer? Now, Dylan has a great observation here. Well, the objective is to target the largest audience as possible. Ooh, I would love to get some feedback on that. That's a provocative comment, Dylan. What do we think of that? The objective is to target the largest possible audience. I'm just going to wait a minute for some of the notes to come in. It depends very much on your audience and how much you know them. I'm actually going to flip ahead a little bit to one of the slides I had saved for a little bit later. One of the issues I see come up with proposal writing very often is that writers are aware that they have multiple stakeholders, and they think, okay, so how do I get most of them on board? Like, so they might take this approach saying, okay, well, we've got to get, most of the folks on board. The key with proposal writing is to think not in terms of kind of the numbers of people whose buy-in you're getting, but you want to think about the weight of that buy-in as well. So it's really important when you are writing a proposal, and again, assuming that you're in conversation with a client, if you're writing an RFP, you may need to do some more background research to try to figure this out. What you want to try to do is figure out who your influencer is. Who, at the end of the day, is the person who's going to sign off on this proposal. So I'm just going to pull up this slide here. How do I get to that very quickly here? Sorry, it's not as easy to flip through here as I can. Oh, there we go. Sorry to make you dizzy. Yeah. So you want to think about a couple of things. You want to think about who is your ultimate decision maker, because your key is to make your document very accessible to them so they can get very quickly to the information they need to make a decision. And you want to make sure that your audience, your language and so on really resonates with that decision maker. Then you want to think about who are the other people around the table who are influencing that decision maker. So this is this idea of kind of getting critical mass, right? And the way to do that is to think about the common ground they have. And the key to that is often to go to a very foundational level and to step back from your long list of benefits and features and start thinking about what the values they are. What are the values that they hold in common? Because if you can find a way to bring those out in your proposal, that's where you really start to get the buy-in across the board. Okay. And Stephanie, would love to hear more on your thought. For a commercial product, you agree for more customized requirements, you likely need to shift your approach. So in fact, I think the mindset shift that needs to happen here is putting the client first rather than this long list of benefits. So the issue I see time and time again in proposals written by people with a deep technical expertise is I see them starting with this huge list of everything and then kind of cherry picking and saying, well, maybe this would work, maybe that would work. And really what we want to do is start with the client as the focus, and then and use that as the main lens. This is what I mean by avoiding what I call tell-all syndrome. I've just published my second book called Business Writing for Innovators and Change-Makers, and I go into this concept in a little bit more in the book. But this is the idea that very often, as we said, a novice salesperson will try to sell you something by just giving you the whole spiel. Here's everything this product can do for you. Whereas a seasoned salesperson is listening very closely and just highlighting those 2 or 3 benefits. Now, here is a great opportunity for you to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, because I'm telling you right now that many, many technical proposal writers have this syndrome. They are doing the tell-all thing. And so if you make a conscious decision to be selective, then you're making the information much more accessible to your audience. You come across right away as somebody who is more organized, more competent, more deeply interested in your client, more the kind of person somebody wants to work with over the long term. So we had a little example, as Stephanie said, with a commercial product, but these same principles of selectivity apply if you're thinking about something like, let's say, this pretend project. So I want you to imagine that you are part of an engineering firm and you are selling, or trying to sell, a green roof to a city school board. So they have a number of schools across the city, and your proposal is that all of the schools should have green roofs. Now, you know there are a number of people on the board, and you've identified these 3 influencers on the school board. So there is the chair of the school board, who is Susan Humphreys. She's a retired grandmother. Sorry, she's a retired nurse and a grandmother of 3 children, and those 3 grandchildren all go to school in the school district. Then we have Wanda, who's a CPA, and she's been out of university about 3 years. And then we have Amit, who trained as a civil engineer, but has now been working in administration for about 20 years. Okay. So as you think about the proposal that you would write to sell this green roof, you could think about a whole slew of benefits, right? Many different benefits of a green roof. So you sit down and start brainstorming them. These are some of the benefits that you might come up with. You know, reducing stormwater, reducing heat, protecting the building. Then there's the greenhouse gas emissions. They're going to be reduced, but we're also going to have trap some dust particles. We're going to provide this lovely natural habitat for birds. We've got low maintenance. And you can see these benefits go off in many, many different directions, right? So then your challenge as you write this proposal is to figure out how you organize these benefits so that they're going to appeal to these stakeholders, right? So again, Susan, retired nurse, grandmother; Wanda, CPA; Amit, chief engineer with the Department of Public Works. So again, as I've numbered these so that we can do this exercise by chat. So when you go through this list of benefits and you think about Wanda, who's a CPA, so what numbers on the list would you say, okay, these are going to appeal to Wanda? So 7 and 8, I see a couple of you have identified those. Also looking, Warren's also looking maybe at number 2. Yvonne or Christopher has identified number 5, which is interesting, trapping the dust particles. Right, so 7 and 8 I see coming up consistently because Wanda's the numbers person, so she's going to be interested in anything that speaks to costs. So the interesting thing here is that, yes, so number 2 could also be of interest. Number 4, Nancy has suggested that, could also be of interest. But there's going to have to be what I call some connecting of the dots, right? So if Wanda's lens is to look at things as a CPA, then you need to show that reducing the amount of heat that escapes the roof is going to have this impact on costs. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, again, how is this going to impact cost, right? So I'm doing a little bit of stereotyping here in terms of just thinking of Wanda as kind of a one-issue reader, and we want to be really careful about that. When I coach people, train people, we go into great detail in terms of how we actually get to know the audience so that we avoid just stereotyping. But what we want to make sure is that we do this connecting of the dots, which means kind of creating the argument, the chain that will help somebody understand how this benefit over here actually ties to what they really care about. Oh, and Christopher, I see your comment. Yes, so number 5 would appeal to Susan. Right, and she might be interested in the habitat for the birds too, or the opportunity to grow food. Again, thinking about somebody who's a nurse and has grandchildren in the school system and so on. So as you are thinking about how you write this proposal for these 3 different people then, you really have to think about, again, how do you find that common ground? And since all of these people are involved in the school board, we can make probably some assumptions that they all do care about the health and safety of the children. They probably all are to some extent under the gun in terms of cost. So you kind of tie these together into a proposal that would show that a green roof is the best for these reasons that appeal at a deep level to your stakeholders. And of course, you'd also want to know at the end of the day who is the person who has the most influence, and that's where you put your emphasis. And Marcel, yes, we should add honeybees in there for sure. Okay. So those are a couple of examples of kind of the process that you go through as you actually tailor a proposal to your audience. It's really about forging that personal connection, showing that you care about what matters to them, which may be quite different from what matters to you. This means focusing on benefits, not features, so the practical end results that they get rather than what is behind the scenes technically. Being very selective about the details you include, because that shows your consideration, your care, and speaking your customer's language. Now, once you really, have a good grasp on who your audience is and you're quite clear about how you are going to select those concepts and data points that are going to appeal to them, then you think about structuring your proposal as a journey. So again, report, proposal, they kind of look the same. If you use a company template, they may even have parts that look quite similar in the template, but it's very, very different. Report, backwards looking, what happened. Proposal is about, hey, where could we go by working together? It's a visioning exercise. You really want to help your audience envision the future. And most people find this very difficult. So that's something to keep in mind. Especially if you are a person who is innovative and creative and forward-looking, and many engineers I've worked with kind of have that mindset, you have to remember that this is actually quite challenging for many of your clients. So how does this journey work? Well, I've done a lot of work with IT consultants, and I remember seeing so many diagrams with, they say like, here's your current state, here's your future state, and all kinds of technical details. I really think that's actually a very powerful model to use in your head. Where are they now? Where could you take them? And the thing to remember is not just where they are in terms of the technology, it's where they are emotionally, right? How do they feel about where they are now? What kind of fears or anxieties or difficulties, challenges, impediments, barriers, lost opportunities, right? How, you want to be able to paint the whole context of where they are now. And then what is it going to be like when they adopt whatever proposal that you are pitching? What will it be like in the future? What kinds of opportunities will open up? What kinds of advantages will they get? And always thinking about, as you write this, how do you present this in such a way so that they can really enter into it and picture what it's going to feel like to be in that better place. So I have here what I would suggest is a basic outline for a proposal. And it really is what I'd call a functional outline. So again, if you're used to working with a proposal template, you may have certain standard headings, introduction, background, timeline, whatever, project description, and so on. I think it's most helpful when you're thinking about persuasion to really picture these 8 stages of the journey and think about what your document needs to achieve at each of these stages. And I will, by the way, if you are kind of furiously taking notes or trying to take screenshots or something, I will make these slides available at the end of our session. I'll send you a link for that so you don't have to be scribbling madly. So the first thing you want to do at stage 1 is really describe the client's present situation. We saw a little bit in that brief example we saw about can-am, right? Now, people often talk about this as pain point, and that is useful to a certain extent. One thing I would also point out to you is if you are selling something that is very, very new, it may not be that you are solving a pain point that people are aware of, but that you're presenting an alternative way to do something that's very new to people, and they don't even realize yet what it could do for them. And I'm just wondering, are any of you in organizations where you are selling that kind of a product or a service or a project where, okay, so Neil, I see your hand going up. Yeah, there's a big difference between kind of pitching a proposal to build, a bridge like the McDonald Bridge, which was built when, the 50s or something? Like, we all know what that kind of looks like. We know what to expect versus, pitching a bridge that is using a brand new material or brand new type of construction methodology. So you want to think about how you paint that context so that you are really motivating the reader to keep reading. And it could be, getting them to understand lost opportunities, for instance. It could be a pain. And then you need to emphasize why they need to change this situation. So even if a proposal has been requested, doesn't mean that the client is really committed to move now. How many of you have gone to the trouble of doing up a big proposal, you put it in, and then the client says, oh, that's really cool, come back to us in a year. Come back to us in 6 months, 18 months. Anybody had that experience? That can happen. So you really need to, you've been on the other side, says Warren. Interesting. Would love to hear from your experience. So a big part of what you need to do early on in the journey is convince the people to take it. Why do they need to act now? Create some sense of urgency. And then you want to show them why it's worth making the change. And then you get into the recommended way to make the change. So you can see we're already halfway through the journey, and just now are we starting to describe technically what the solution is, right? We've been framing it till now. And here is where most people fall down in proposal writing, is they don't invest enough time and energy in creating that frame. And unless you do that, literally, your audience is not going to be able to view your solution in the light you want them to be able to view it. So then you need to talk about very concretely about the positive results they can have from the proposed change. This is the vision of the future. And that's not enough. So again, another kind of, if I had a red pen, I'd underline it here. Why your solution is the best solution is a piece that you absolutely need to speak to here. Because they might read your proposal and say, oh yeah, absolutely, you're right, we need to do this. And then, oh yeah, didn't Bobby Joe tell us something about that? Let's go with him, right? Again, I wonder if anybody's been in that situation. So really need to build up the reason why you are the best person to work with. And of course, if you've been listening to your audience and been very selective about the way you're presenting your benefits, you're already doing that. And then how you're going to actually get this success happening, how you're going to work together, right? And this is where you get a sense to show through your writing style, through the way you present, what your collaboration style is like. And of course, you include all of the information that people need to make their decision. And finally, the next steps or contact information. So just really quickly, let me give you a super simple, almost silly example here, okay? So I want you to imagine that you are with Murridge and Associates, and your proposal you're working on is to build a bridge to Blueberry Island. So let's picture you're in this small town. You're like you're a mile away from this island that has all kinds of blueberries on it, and right now everybody's taking a boat over, right? So to take people on this persuasion journey, I wouldn't just start in by saying, we can build you an amazing bridge, here's our technology, this is what we'll do, it's state of the art, blah, blah, blah. That's the way a lot of technical proposals start, and that's going to flop. Because you know what? Could be that the townspeople are pretty happy taking that rowboat. It's actually kind of a nice little relaxing thing to do, you know, you just kind of take an hour, you row yourself over there. Maybe they're not seeing the issue. So we need to start by framing it in a way, right? And so based on conversations maybe you've had with the town council, you discover that, oh, wow, like this is a huge tourism opportunity. Or maybe there's actually somebody who's dying to come in and establish a jam factory in town. And this is going to, you know, would have all kinds of jobs. And so, you know, maybe there's a whole economic development angle here. You need to provide the right frame so that you show how the situation is not optimal and requires some kind of change. So you would indicate the urgency. Maybe we need to make a decision now because we've seen that tourism is picking up, or there's been a huge spike in the demand for blueberry jam. So this is our opportunity now, okay? Then the benefits of making the change, you know, you would spell out in detail, always tying it back to what you have described as the problem in the situation, all of the great results they will get, and then why your solution is the best solution. So why a bridge and not a hovercraft? Why this kind of bridge and not this kind of bridge? Why go with you? What's special about Murridge? And then you get to all the details of how this will actually work, how the project will unfold, and so on. So again, you can see that so much of this is about the framing. Okay. So with all this in mind then, I'd like to wrap up today's session by sharing with you some kind of nitty-gritty ways that you can apply these larger principles we've been talking about. So we've been talking a lot about getting to know your audience, about being very choosy about the content you share with them in the proposal, so it's tailored to them, and about taking them on this carefully structured, persuasive journey. So now I'm going to point out some very specific pitfalls that you'll want to zero in on. And again, when I coach people and I work with them one-on-one or in a team, and we go through actual documents they're working on, these are some of the nitty-gritty things we look at. Basically, to avoid the pitfalls, I'm going to point out, you want to target what I call the 4 A's: alignment, accessibility, accuracy, and aspiration. Okay. So alignment, as someone pointed out very early in our conversation, the word generic is a killer. So you want to show that you are not just giving the client something that could work for any client. You want to show that you are well aligned. So avoid the pitfall of being generic by being aligned. Customize each proposal. Emphasize benefits over feature. Choose your content super carefully. Okay. So the second A that will keep you out of the proposal pitfalls I see is accessibility. So critical because a proposal almost always is going to a group, right? So when you think about your multiple stakeholders, they will be wanting individually to get to different kinds of information. And you want to make it really easy for them to find your way through your document. So how do you do that? And again, this is part of kind of the selectivity, the choosiness, because you're being very thoughtful about how you organize and arrange your document for readability. So things like headings and subheadings, using lists, visuals are so important. Can you show in a visual a concept that would take you 3 paragraphs to explain? Can you create a visual of a timeline that enables people to see something very quickly rather than reading, through a long list? You want to get in the habit of thinking visually. And finally, using simple everyday language wherever you can. Yes, you sometimes have to use really complex words because you're engineers and there are going to be some terms that you need to include, but what you want to do is make sure the rest of your language is very simple so that those special words are easy for people to process. Okay. So avoid the pitfall of very dense documents that are hard to navigate by being accessible. The next pitfall you want to avoid is I would say, again, being too, I'm almost going to say being too salesy, which you may think is strange because I've been telling you to think like a salesperson. Remember that as a salesperson, you are in a proposal, you are leveraging your strength as an engineer, right? And so what you want to make sure is that even as you are infusing your proposal language with some words that will encourage an emotional response from your reader, you want to make absolutely certain that you are stating facts clearly and truthfully. So being very specific, supporting your claims with evidence. This is something that I have seen a lot where people will make a statement about something, this will do this, it will deliver this benefit, research has shown. Well, where's your research, right? Making sure that you back up what you're saying, providing the source of any data you use. These all go to credibility points, right? And making sure that you label and summarize your charts and diagrams, because just putting something into a chart does not mean that the person on the other end will be able to interpret it, right? And then finally, what you want to avoid ultimately is a proposal that fails to inspire, right? And this again goes back to that simple distinction between a report or a mere delivery of information versus something that's selling. So the final A to keep in mind is aspiration. What you want to do is show your clients how you can help them achieve their goals underlined, because it's all about tuning in to what they want to do. So how can you create a proposal that engages and inspires? You paint a really detailed vision of future success. And then this is very subtle sometimes, and it's a matter of thinking about how you create something like a project description in such a way that it's tied directly to business benefits for the clients, tied to the same language they use in their mission and vision statement, tied to specific strategic goals. What you want to do is map your solution to very specific aspects of their problem. So you want to make sure that the way you describe their situation at the beginning sets up the problem in such a way that by the time they read through your solution, they're able to say, oh, wow, yes, I see, this is a direct connection, right? You're not leaving it open to them to do the imagining. You are actually enabling them to imagine what you see. And using very positive language as well throughout your proposal. I know, Corey, you mentioned early at the beginning that one of the things that distinguishes a successful salesperson from a novice is confidence. And that comes across in your proposal writing when you use language that is simple, clear, direct, and positive. So I hope that these tips today have given you a little bit more confidence about proposal writing, a little bit more clarity about it. And I will put into the chat window the link where you can download the slides. So it's right there. I also put in my email if anybody wants to get in touch with any questions they have. I am always happy to chat and always curious to learn just about what particular challenges folks are facing in their industry. And we do have a few moments left right now if there are any more questions that you want to raise in the chat window.